Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and this is the great Scott Horton joining me once again on another episode. Scott, thank you so much for coming back. And just to kind of give a little bit of background to our viewers, Scott dabbles in a lot of things. He's a busy guy, and he is the director of the Scott Horton Academy, which congratulations for getting that up off the ground and getting that moving. I'm sure you've been consumed with that. You also are the director of the Libertarian Institute, and you also do work with antiwar.com. You're an editorial director over there, if I remember correctly. And in addition, I don't remember things super well, so I apologize, but you also have your podcast, and then you also co-host a podcast with Daryl Cooper called Provoked, which is a fantastic podcast. I love listening to you guys go back and forth on a myriad of issues. And you also have several books. You have Provoked. You also have Enough Already. And then if there's one more, it is Fool's Errand, right? And those are three of your most, I would say probably some of your most popular work amongst a lot of people, but certainly some pretty good books.
That's the sum of it. Yep, you got
it. And you've also, needless to say, you've been on thousands of different podcast episodes, and you've even been on Judge Andrew Napolitano's Judging Freedom. You've been on Daniel Davis, and I'm pretty sure I've seen you a number of times on Piers Morgan and so on and so forth. So, man, it is. I'm so happy you took time out of your busy schedule to come back on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So a lot's happened since you've last been on, and needless to say, it's only been more chaos, unfortunately, both domestically and foreign. There's all the stuff going on in Minnesota right now domestically, which is absolutely just, pardon my language, but it's a shit show. I just had the LPMN chair on last weekend, and she was talking to me about all of the craziness over there, how they're pretty much going down the street in Minneapolis, and they're pretty much just ID checking anybody that they feel they want to, which is crazy. So we can get into some of that along with any other woes domestically, but there's also the questions of Ukraine, Greenland. We're talking about Iran, and let us not forget about Venezuela. And, so there's a lot to go over. Wherever you would kind of like to tee off first, I'm willing to go there. So what do you think right now is the most pressing issue, I guess, that we're dealing with at the moment, Scott?
It's hard to say, but I guess it's probably a tie between what's happening with the war between the Bin Ladenites and the Kurds in Syria, and the still looming potential for an aggressive war, another one against Iran, in an attempt to change the regime there.
Yeah,
and it is pretty chaotic. Usually when Eric Garris, from the director of antiwar.com, when he calls me, I go, "Hey, how's it going?" Now when he calls me, I go, "Oh no, what did he do now?"
Right.
Oh,
right.
Man. Yeah. So, I'm a silver lining kind of guy in a way. And I've always been very sympathetic to Trump and his supporters' hatred of their enemies, who many of whom are also my same enemies. And, I still want to like the guy, if only just because at least he's funny and some stuff.
Sure.
No, man.
Right.
We all want to not have to hate them all as much as Bill Clinton for a change, I don't know. And so, like, one of the things that I like about what he's doing, although I don't like the way he's doing it necessarily, there's got to be a better way. He's really cracking the foundations of the pretensions of this so-called liberal rules-based world order, which really means the American world empire, disregarding all the rest of the international law that the American world empire invented and foisted on the rest of the world, and then decided wasn't good enough. And so, there was a pretty, seemingly important speech. I don't know if it'll really be seen as a watershed or not, but the Prime Minister of Canada gave a speech in Davos where he said America's challenge to Europe and NATO over Greenland. It just goes to show that, like, this whole American-based, rules-based thing that we have supported all along, and I forgot exactly how he said it, but he did essentially say, that we've gone along with as long as it was pointed at everybody else.
For sure.
Now we don't like it anymore. And we want to go back to the promise where you respect national sovereignty and stuff, and you don't just take things. And then I'll try to get back to Iran, because that's what you really asked me, is what was most important. But on this whole Greenland thing, the story from yesterday, and this is ever evolving, so who knows, but the story was that after all this belligerence and threats to use military force, that then Trump met with the head of NATO and negotiated with him as though he, and which, like, the politicians in Denmark denounced this. Like, no one delegated their role to him. What's going on? But then Trump said, okay, we negotiate a deal where we're just going to have these pockets of sovereignty in Greenland. But that's been the treaty since 1951, is that we can put whatever military bases on Greenland we want. So this is just, after all of this conflict and contention, he's climbing essentially all the way back down again. But then whatever, like, I don't care about Greenland. But the point is, I want America and Europe to be alienated from each other. Let them protect their own interests. They could have had their EU army, and America could have just bailed out of Europe. And in fact, like, look, if you could get some sort of like thin confederation of security arrangement that includes Britain, France, Germany, Poland, and Russia together without the US there, and let them all figure out how to balance this, and not compete in the same sphere, but work together on security in Europe. And that would have been the most likely policy to lead to peace. And that was on the table, and Bill Clinton just blew it up, because he's Clinton, the face-biting rapist who ruins everything he touches. And so, but why should it have been? What? Because Paul Wolfowitz says it's holy writ that America must be the dominant force in Europe forever. Forget that. We should be coming home, and I'm not for lording it over Latin America instead. We shouldn't have a world empire at all. But it is just, I can't help but take it as the ultimate insult on top of injury to the American people, that we are all forced to subsidize the militaries of all of these first world nations, just so that we can have dominance over their policy. And it just doesn't make any sense over the long term, does it? If I pitch to you and your audience that, look, the middle part of North America, us, and our taxes that we pay for with our jobs that we got to actually go to and do, that we are going to, on that basis, be the dominant force on the rest of planet Earth for the next, I don't know, 300 years. You kick me right out of your living room, right? That's just crazy. It makes no sense at all. As Republicans used to say in the Bill Clinton years, we can't be the policeman of the world. There are problems, and Lord knows we can send diplomats to try to calm tensions. When Trump brags, and he clearly exaggerates, but when he boasts about getting on the phone and telling other nations to cool it and knock it off and don't make me angry, and try to get them to calm down, the first part of that is great. Never mind the make him angry part. But just, if India and Pakistan are getting into it, this is a great example, right? Where some Pakistani terrorists attacked some Indian civilians in Kashmir, is I think the way it started. Could have been government targets, but I think it was civilians that they killed. And it was like, because it was Pakistani terrorists, it's undetermined whether the ISI put them up to it or not. We don't really know whether it was a exact government operation or not. The Indians retaliate, and there are airstrikes going on both sides. And these are nuclear powers. Donald Trump, from all the reporting I saw, Donald Trump got on the phone to both sides and told them, look, man, knock it off right now, because I said so. And, again, we could drop the I said so, but still, or even without any kind of threat of military force, America has a lot of pull in the world besides that we could threaten, in terms of whatever trade or whatever. I guess I'm not, all other things being equal, I'm really not in favor of sanctions or lording other countries or anything either. But anyway, by all means, America could be a peacemaker without having to be the decision maker in every conflict, where what we say goes because we say so. Because then, just as Rothbard warned, in For a New Liberty, writing all about this back in the 1970s, this is the problem with the entire UN system and the so-called liberal rules-based world order of American dominance is basically comes from that. But it comes from this premise of collective security that says that no one is allowed to fight ever. And if they do, it's illegal. And then that means somebody has to be the world government to enforce that. And that means us. People say there is no world government. Yes, there is. It's in Washington, D.C. And it's suicide for our country. You can see how it serves their interests as, individuals and as politicians and as power mongers to serve in those roles for themselves. But like, what does that mean to the people out here in the country? It just means we have to carry the entire world on our back, which we cannot afford to do. We clearly cannot afford to do. And so, and you know what, man? I am not some kind of utopian or like any of this one world commie stuff. Like I would just as soon throw out the entire United Nations Charter and, have, much less as far as so-called international law to even be enforced out there. And I'm far from any kind of utopian that says that like, oh yeah, no, once all humanity just listens to me, then everything's going to be fine. Like, that's not the point. But the thing is, the danger that is drummed up to justify our intervention is always so exaggerated. When the reality is just think about it. We didn't have to do Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria, any of that. And we all know that now. There's total consensus. The entire last 25 years, we didn't have to do that. Well, what should we have been doing instead? Picking a fight with China? We didn't have to. We've been able to get along with them for 50 years now. And so that everything's going good there. Let's not pick a fight there with a H-bomb armed state when we actually have nothing big to fight about there. The Russians, everybody knows that it was America that ruined our relationship with Russia and started this new Cold War against them in 1,000 ways. Let me count the ways. It's all in my book. Right? And so, when I was, you're a bit younger than me, I think, but I'm almost 50 here. But so at the end of the Cold War, I was, a younger teenager, 14, 15, whatever, when the Cold War is ending and the Soviet Union is falling. And I'm telling you, man, they had a whole kind of scare campaign that now Germany and Japan are going to come back and take over the world. Now this is what we have to fear because, and you know how you can tell that Japan is going to conquer the world is because they're undercutting Chrysler with their Honda Civics. That's the definition of their world empire. It's going to enslave us all, just like back in our grandfather's day and all stuff back when they were, which by the way, they were dominant in East Asia, not North America. But anyway, slight discrepancy there. But anyway, so I just bring that up to point out that, as Bill Hicks said back then, there's nobody out there. That was it. The Soviet Union's gone. National Socialist Germany doesn't exist. Maoist China at that time was broke, but at least they're friendly with us. And been nobody's coming. Take the globe and spin it. There's no power in Latin America that exists at all. Brazil looks big on a map, but that's mostly jungle, and they have no military power and no desire in a million years, in the next 1 million years, to challenge the power of the North American colossus here. Give me a break. Keep spinning. There are no powers in Africa. The only one that even matters at all really is Egypt, and they're completely pwned by the United States of America, friendly with us for the last 50 years, 45. Then, that's it. There are no other powers in Africa anywhere. In Europe, every single nation state is our friend, and including Russia. They are still, Vladimir Putin still says our American partners, like kind of tongue in cheek.
Oh, for sure,
like they have tried to stay within our sphere of influence and not be our enemy. It's America that made it this way. And we still look, they use Ukrainian rocket engines to launch American astronauts into space on Russian rockets to this day. Okay. We are still friends with Russia. I don't care what any damn Democrat in your neighborhood says. They're stupid and wrong. There's no reason in the world that, we have to have a civilizational conflict with them. That was because they were Marxists, not because they're Russians. They're Orthodox Christians instead of Protestants and Catholics. Is that the problem? Their flag offends you because it's red, white, and blue? Is that what are we doing? No. And then again, keep spinning the globe. Now you got India. Yeah, they got 1.5 billion people, but they're broke and socialist in 10,000 ways. And they're a challenge to humanity in the sense that they could get into a nuclear war with Pakistan, less likely with China. They are nuclear rivals with their neighbors there, and there are negotiations to be had to try to get those tensions reduced as much as possible. But as far as like India waging a world empire, forget it. And despite all the hype you hear about China, China does not want to replace the United States as the global hegemon. I mean, first of all, just think it through logically. You think Chairman Xi is looking at W. Bush and Barack Obama and Trump and Biden and saying, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to blow my country's brains out. I want to spend every last extra bit of capital I have making all the rest of the world hate my guts. Yeah, no, maybe not. Right? Like, how stupid could they possibly be to want to follow America's path here? Why not just hire, Meghan McCain or whatever to come and run China? You think that's what they want to do? No, what we're going to do, we're going to have William Crystal's son come in, and he's going to tell his son-in-law Continetti. We'll have him. So, and then that's it. Now you're across the Pacific Ocean. Now you're back at the United States of America again. You used up the whole, all of your scaremongering for the whole planet Earth, but there was no enemy except ourselves, right? Like that old Doonesbury cartoon about Vietnam. We have met the enemy. He is us. That is what is going on here. And none of it has to be this way at all. And honestly, seriously, like, okay, I'm very adamant the way I speak, and I'm a very ideological libertarian or whatever. But honestly, like, your right-wing or left-wing brother-in-law ought to be able to sign on to what I just said 100%. Like, argue? They're like, oh, yeah, good thing America's holding the world together the last 30 years. Who knows what trouble we'd be in if our government had not confiscated all of our wealth and destroyed it in the name of dominating all of the rest of mankind. We might have dams that aren't collapsing and bridges that aren't falling down. And interest payment on the national debt that we can actually afford to pay. Yeah.
Well, and I've said this probably ad nauseum over the course of my my podcast, but it's like all of this stuff always tends to come home to roost. All of the wars and all of the methods, and whether it's direct warfare, whether it's economic, whether it is however they want to go out and project their power. I've always said that, look, like if people are gonna sit here and they're gonna say like, oh, this is great, like we're making like the big tagline is like, we're bringing freedom and democracy to the rest of the world. It's like, well, maybe the rest of the world doesn't always subscribe to the American way of doing something, and I don't have a problem with that if they want to live however they want to live. That's not for me to say, but it's like you look at some of the things that have gone on. I'll say even the past, like, say 10 years, maybe 15 years, right? We've seen such a sharp escalation in the way that the federal government conducts itself, even at home. It's like it takes all of these things and it applies the same militaristic thing on its own people. And you'll have people sit there and justify it up and down. And I think, it's like you really have to have like an eyes wide shut type of mentality to be like, no, this is perfectly fine. This certainly has nothing to do with the way that we've been trying to conduct ourselves abroad. And then when something bad does happen and it does come home, the whole blowback or, the reprisal from somebody else, everybody acts surprised. It's like, I can't believe that this happened. It's like, well, how can you not believe it? Like we were over in the sandbox for 25 years. And we screwed up everything. We messed around with those people. We killed millions of people over there. And it's like, in the end of the day, how do you expect nothing bad to happen? And then that's not even accounting for a number of the things that you've brought up, as it pertains to our relations with Russia, as it pertains to Europe, as it pertains to all of these other things. And it's like, it is amazing to me that you still have a country like Russia that's like, hey, you know what? Like, we would still rather just, have decent relations with you versus being an adversary for the rest of our lives, which is, in my mind, when I go back and I look at the founders, especially when you look at the way they say we should treat people, It should be trade, goodwill with others, friendly relations, certainly not taking our military and treating everything as if it's a nail to be hammered down, and it's like, it really, just seeing the way that we've escalated, especially in the way that we conduct ourselves in places like Venezuela, the Middle East, even in Europe, it's like, yeah, my main concern is the United States. But all of this, again, coming back around to it, all of this does come home to us at some point, whether that's through taxation, whether it's through laws, or whether it's a direct reprisal. And I think that's something a lot of people either have been conditioned to just not really realize or accept, or whatever the case is. I don't know if it's just been pounded out of some people's brains, but for any of us who kind of pay attention, we're like, yeah, like, this is suboptimal at best, and this is only going to cause a lot more issues down the road. And I just listened to I think it was Larry Johnson on Daniel Davis's show, and they were talking specifically about Germany and Europe as it pertained to like their positions on Greenland in particular, right? And I think if I remember correctly, and I might be paraphrasing terribly, but Larry Johnson's like, yeah, like, it's not unbelievable to think that they would look at what the US is trying to do with Greenland and be like, you know what? Maybe we should start to deal with Russia in some capacity again. Maybe have some deals, maybe have some trade agreements. And I think it was Merz who just came out, Friedrich Merz in Germany, who was like, I think we need to talk to the Russians again. It's like, wow, well, welcome back to some form of sanity. Now,
you're saying
whether that amounts to anything, I have no idea.
You're saying, if I understand you right, you're saying Larry's point was, now that the Europeans feel like America's turning our back on them and don't have their back, that now they're not so tough as the little brother. Now they want to go and deal with their enemy instead of continuing to double down.
The defender has become the aggressor, essentially.
I like that. So this is what in economics, right? We just call a moral hazard, right? It's the same thing in the neighborhood. If you have a bully with a big brother who knows that his big brother's going to bail him out no matter what trouble he gets into. And so, and the Europeans are far more belligerent, especially on Russia issues.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise would be, and for the long, and look, I think a big part of the reason for the war is to prevent the Germans from getting along with the Russians. Then you have, these anti-Russian hawks kind of dealing with the aftermath of America deliberately splitting them apart and trying to prevent that alliance. So, or even just normal relationship. But yeah, if America wasn't there, and this is like, this comes right to, just sort of, not just, libertarian analysis or whatever, but I think just kind of a basic human decency and understanding versus the prerogatives of the American empire. So the Russians and the Germans build this big peace pipeline, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, to pump natural gas from Russia to Germany.
Right.
And then for the Germans to pump euros to Russia in exchange. And you have on one hand just mercantilism, where you have American natural gas manufacturers who would like to export to Germany and want to freeze the Russians out just because they're competition. And if they can use state power to do that and apply sanctions and even have pipelines destroyed, then that's in their interest to do, certainly to prevent it in the first place. Right. But then more importantly, on the strategic level, certainly a libertarian would tell you, and I think just a regular man would say, that it makes sense for us to encourage the Germans and the Russians to trade euros for hydrocarbons because we want them to be economically interdependent so that they have more to lose if they get in a fight, because we don't want them to get in a fight, because the last two times that Germany and Russia got in a fight, it was the worst thing that ever happened. So we don't want them to fight. We want to disincentivize fighting by getting Russia hooked on euros and Germany hooked on CH4. so that they can be interdependent and work together and to delay, hopefully indefinitely, confrontation. Now, if you listen to the American War Party, they just take Frederick Bastiat and they just turn him on his head.
Oh,
and they
for sure.
say, no, see, if we get Germany economically interdependent with Russia, then we'll never get Germany to help us fight Russia.
Right.
We want Germany to be available to fight Russia. And if they're economically interdependent, then they're compromised and blackmailed and pwned and dominated by Russia. We have to protect Germany from being so terribly, horribly compromised by the Russians that they would do business with them. And so, and from the point of view of Washington, that only makes sense, right? They don't see how absurd that is, where we're looking at it like, yeah, but okay, maybe you guys like money and maybe you guys like power, but maybe keeping the peace between Germany and Russia is beyond any priceless value that you could possibly imagine. It's peace between Germany and Russia is as valuable as the moon. It is as valuable as the water vapor in the sky. We need peace between Germany and Russia forever and for always, please. But they see that as like, no, man, see, that's called being enslaved to the Kremlin.
It's certainly never that way when it comes to us in Germany. You know, that's not slavery. That's, you know, that's so democratic, and that's, you know, that's freedom. And it is amazing because I think when I was looking at some of the things that I believe it was Merz, it might have been one of their energy sector people in Germany. I think it might have been Merz though, but somebody in Germany admitted like, hey, you know, it was a terrible idea getting rid of all of our nuclear power. That was it's like, well, yeah, you're a day late and $1 short on that one. You've pretty much destroyed your whole energy infrastructure and you're completely subservient to somebody else for that. And it's like, I can't help but to think, Scott, that the founders may, in their infinite wisdom, been right about the idea of like, hey, if we want prosperity, like if we want to prosper as a country, it's important for other countries to prosper. But in doing that, we also don't subsidize their failure. We don't create an entangling relationship that'll drag us down if they start going south. But we can trade with people. We can have friendly relations with people. We can, you know, have, this working relationship to where we can all benefit from it instead of perpetually waging war. And to get people to like you a little bit more, even if you're on opposing sides, perhaps you can trade with those people. You just don't like go out of your way to just be like, well, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm just going to bomb your country. And then you'll see how democracy really is. Matter of fact, you know, the liberties or the founders saw it as we should allow liberty to be our example to the world so they can see how freaking awesome and prosperous we can be without even having to pretty much mow a country over to make them do what we want. And, you know, kind of pivoting back to Iran, because I know you brought that up and that was the point you wanted to make. Like, how is it we can't like possibly do that over in Iran? And I know there's a litany of reasons for that, but it's like they could be prosperous and we could have a fantastic working relationship with Iran, but our interest is more like, oh, you know, there's this chaos and there's these protesters and there's all of these things going on, which I had heard somebody talk about. There was, before all of the protests, there was like somewhere around like 40,000 Starlink terminals, and there's a whole other there was this big slew of things that didn't really add up. And when you look at how the protests are, like a lot of it was alluded to as not being organic the way that the U.S. State Department says it is, but rather, oh, you know, we're friends with these people, so we'll send these people to do the thing to the other people we don't like. Am I far off on that?
Yeah, well, look, and this does go to your broader point about showing the world by example, by having a society the way that, you know, is agreed upon, at least as far as the structure of the national government goes, of how things are supposed to run here. And then what do? We do the opposite of that, right? Our government, especially our covert agencies like CIA and others, they work to commit violent acts of attempted regime change in the name of liberty, and they just get blood all over it, right? And so, get back to Iran in a second, but just look at the entire history of the United States and our role in the world since the end of the Cold War. If we had just demilitarized, because we simply don't need this empire anymore, and had just come home, then there's no reason in the world to think that war would have broken out between France and Germany and Poland and Russia and Europe. They'd have been just fine. There's no reason in the world to think that, all the things being equal, the Middle East or East Asia or whatever would be any worse off in terms of like, oh, they were somehow destined for conflict, that we intervened or something like that. And so, but then especially, under Bill Clinton and Obama too, but especially under George W. Bush, is this whole message of everything we do in the name of freedom. Everything we do in the name of teaching you to be good men, just like we are, and to adopt our ways and in all of our various things. And dressing up, hiding essentially, from my point of view, I think there's probably a certain level of sincerity in his idiocy, but from my point of view, just in the most cynical fashion, hiding behind the Declaration of Independence, invoking it as the excuse to wage this world empire in the most cruel fashion. People forget how absolutely horrifically violent W. Bush's era was. He killed at least 1 million people, or got at least 1 million people killed, and probably more than that. And then without Iraq War II, you'd have never had Libya, Syria. The rest was all because of him too. But anyway, so if you just and it was like that under Bill Clinton too, and to a degree under his father as well, and who's really the guy who inherited the post-Cold War world here. And so they blew it, right? So, but what if instead they had just really done the limited government thing? And then obviously, if we're even close to living up to the ideals of how America's supposed to be run, and our Bill of Rights and our free market economy and all of these things, then we would have so much foundation to stand on to criticize others for not doing it good enough. Hey, you, the sovereign of wherever is stand, you're not protecting your people's liberty enough. And they know that, and we know that, and shame on you. And we could talk about that all day long. Only just think of how much better it would be, literally, like in practice, how much better it would be than doing that as actually part of a CIA, National Endowment for Democracy, USAID plot to overthrow their government and install a pliant dictator or a pliant whatever it is to do what the Americans want them to do, because that's what they actually did instead. And I think they've done a lot to completely discredit. Not just have they not done what you and Dr. Paul and Thomas Jefferson suggested there, but they've done the exact opposite of that, or even like the inverse, like weird horror movie funhouse version of that, where it's not libertarianism, but neoliberalism that they're spreading, right? Like this corrupt imperial crony capitalism at 2,000-pound bomb point, and they just have disgraced the legacy of the authors of the Declaration and the rest of what America is supposed to be. And so, you look at, let's just pick on the Muslim world, for example. There are all kinds of problems in the way that these societies operate that we have plenty of room to criticize and even like ridicule, right? Like if you look at, I always pick on the poor Afghans, even though I wrote a book about how to leave them alone. But in Pashtun culture, intersex sex is for procreation only. And for sport, they, to way disproportionate degrees, I think, compared to probably any other culture in the world, they rape children, and especially boys. And so now, like, what can we do about that? Because what America did in Afghanistan was we hired those child rapists to be the police chief, the mayor, and the governor. And that's true. Okay, the Taliban hanged those guys from nooses. The Americans came and put them in power. So now what in the hell ground do we have to stand on to mock and ridicule these Pashtuns that like, hey, guess what, caveman? All of humanity has figured out what you're supposed to do with your tallywhacker, and it's not that. You absolute idiots, right? And actually, who is responsible for the most child rape in Afghanistan in our era? George W. Bush and Barack Hussein Obama. They are the child rapists. America is the child rapist of Afghanistan. So, same thing for Somalia. In Somalia, they still practice female circumcision. That is, or female genital mutilation. Now, I'm not saying we need to go in there and do a regime change, but I am saying we should be laughing at them and mocking them and ridiculing them until they stop such absolutely heinous and barbaric and caveman style, barbarian level behavior. But what's actually the worst thing about Somalia? That George Bush has been blowing it up and backing warlords and slaughtering people there since December 2001. It's America's longest war in history. People all upset about the Somalis in Minnesota don't know America's been in Somalia killing people to death with high explosives since Christmas 2001, just after they were finished letting bin Laden escape from Nangarhar province. They were taking the war to Somalia instead. And so what's actually the worst thing about Somalia? Is it all their corruption, all their warlordism, their female circumcision? No, it's the United States of America. The United States of America is the worst thing about Somalia. And that's just true. So now, if it hadn't have been that way, or Iran is another great example. Talk about an imperfect republic there, the Islamic Republic of Iran. We ridicule them all day long. For whatever it is that they're doing wrong, except that the worst thing about Iran is the constant threats of bombing by the United States and constant threats of regime change and unending economic war since the days of Ronald Reagan, but especially since W. Bush, Obama, and, when Obama made that nuclear deal, he never did lift the sanctions. People kind of pretend, right-wingers like to pretend that Obama was in the Ayatollah's pocket or whatever. Not so at all. He never lived up to his end of the deal anyway. And then as soon as Trump came in the first time, he tore up that deal and put on Obama called them crippling sanctions. Trump called them maximum pressure. And then when Biden came in, he kept every bit of it. He did not unwind a single bit of what Trump was doing there. And they have only waged massive economic war and to deprive people of that country of their standard of living, just like in the 1990s against the Iraqi people, in the explicit name of making the civilian population so miserable that they will somehow risk everything to rise up and overthrow their government. Brings us more specifically to your question here, which is what all happened there. And what all happened there was a massive inflation protest, which what undermined more support for Joe Biden than any other thing? Price inflation. And what's undermining support for Donald Trump right now? The same exact thing. Well, it's really hard to be an Ayatollah when prices are up 40% this year. I mean, that's just, that means anybody whose savings were denominated in Iraqi dinars are wiped out, right? Hope you invested in anything other than cash in Iran or you're screwed. Again, this is like, I'm sorry, was that the last interview where I mentioned income taxation there? This is in the Communist Manifesto, inflationary money. So you could destroy, what's the purpose of that? Why would Marx explicitly want inflationary money? It's so that anybody who already has their act together is liquidated and destroyed with the stroke of a pen. That's why. And so that's what's happened, is totally destroyed the people's standard of living there. And so there are these huge protests. Now, there are some clips of people saying death to the dictator and down with Khomeini and whatever, but there's no reason at all for you or your audience to believe that those massive anti-inflation protests were an attempted overthrow, revolution of the government by the people of the country. What, just because they said that in Western media? Just because they claimed that? Think of how many protests you've seen in America where nobody thinks that anyone's even trying to actually overthrow the government. Get the hell out of here. The biggest protest we ever had in history was this No Kings protest. And everyone, even the liberals, all widely agreed The thing was completely stupid. It had no goals whatsoever other than to whine and pout that we lost the last election and wish we hadn't. Boo-hoo. And then the most notable thing about it was that Trump tweeted out an AI video of him doing an airstrike, dropping crap on all their heads. That was the only, nobody thought for a minute, they're like, oh no, the Department of Justice and military are about to turn over their power to General Happablap, who is seizing authority from Donald Trump. No, it doesn't mean anything. Was the Ayatollah or his ruling regime's party, were they even being threatened by the protesters? No. But then what happened? After a couple of days of this, then you have trained, well-armed groups of men who waged wars, who attacked police stations, set arson fires, try to seize transportation hubs, go in there and kill innocent people in the protests in order to heighten the tension, straight out of the playbook. And the purpose of that is what? Is to provoke the Iranian government to then send out the IRGC to ruthlessly crack down on the protest, and so that they can blame the reaction as being the cause of the thing and saying, oh no, we're all Barack Obama and we have a responsibility to protect, like in Libya. You're not allowed to kill protesters or else we'll stop you to save the protesters. Like, you want to talk about rules-based world order. Show me the rules that say a state, a nation state on the planet is not allowed to prevent a violent revolution against it, particularly an elected government. Although obviously the Ayatollah is elected by this ruling council thing, but they have a parliament and a judiciary and things. They even have a bicameral legislature, which they all stand for election and all this. So there's no reason in the world to think that the people protesting were trying to overthrow the government there. There's every reason to think that these armed groups of people were agents of foreign powers. They're either working for the Israelis or working for the Americans or the Azeris, and or possibly maybe they're freelance bin Ladenites who are just taking their opportunity. It could be bin Ladenites controlled by the West. I'm not precluding the chance of that, but someone asked me on Twitter, who do you think's behind this? I'm like, well, obviously MEK terrorists and monarchist terrorists backed by Israel and the United States. And then I'd be willing to bet PJAK, which is the Iranian Kurdish branch of the Turkish PKK, and the Syrian YPG, who are the Syrian Kurds who are being wiped out by the American-backed bin Ladenites there now. And then I bet you America's backing PJAK here in Iran. And then there was a story, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain it was in the Wall Street Journal, that said that, America, they dropped the J. Now it's just PAK, but it's the same thing. The Iranian version of the PKK. And and they were on the ground there fighting. And there are Kurds calling for the return of the monarchy. These are foreign-backed mercenaries, traitors to their country, if they're even from there at all. And and so, man, I got to tell you, I'm not a religious guy at all, and I sure as hell am not a Shiite Muslim, and I ain't got no relations from Persia, and I got no brief for the Ayatollah or his regime whatsoever. The only thing about me is when it comes to Iran is just debunking lies about them, because I'm trying to prevent America from getting involved in worse crises where we don't belong based on lies. And so that's the only thing about it. They say Iran's making nuclear weapons, then I explain to you why that's not true, and I know that it's not. And now you know too when you hear me explain that kind of thing. Same thing here. I don't care for any personal reason whatsoever, or Texan or American reason, what happens to the Ayatollah, other than that he ain't taken out by American force and or allied force that implicates the United States. And when people just assume that the Ayatollah's regime is the worst case scenario for Iran in the world, well, that's just not true. Right? You could have a civil war for power there between major ethnic or religious factions backed by outside powers. You could see Iran turn into what Syria was 15 years ago, what Syria is right now, slaughterhouse. And you give a lot of people reason to think that this guy's been in power since 1989, the Supreme Leader. And it's not like he rules day to day everything or whatever. He's above the president and all that, and has a lot of authority, but and certainly on foreign policy he does. But anyway, point being, this could be relative stability and even relative freedom for the Iranian people compared to what comes next if the Americans have their way. And I think just because we're from here and we're such nice guys, we forget how absolutely ruthless Washington, D.C.
Oh,
is.
100%.
So look at what they're doing to the Kurds right now. They backed the Kurds against the Islamic State, and now they've just decided they don't care anymore. And this was always going to happen, and now it's happening. And the bin Ladenites are turning on the Kurds. They're going to forcibly integrate them and attempt to reestablish sovereignty over all that territory in northeastern Syria, and commit mass war crimes on the way. And there's already footage, it's all over Twitter, of them raping and murdering, or I don't know, raping, but obviously like unconscious Kurdish women who are captive and shackled, who are obviously destined to be raped and murdered. You know, with these bin Ladenites stepping on their heads and beat the crap out of them and stuff. So this is absolutely horrible war crimes. In fact, you know, America, someone should do, maybe me, should go back and do a count of all the different times that America has backed and then betrayed the Kurds, including in Turkey, in Syria, and in Iraq, and now maybe even in Iran, over and over and over again. And it may have even been the Kurds that were in question when Henry Kissinger, or maybe it was the Hmong tribesmen in Vietnam. I'd have to go back and look. But I think it may have been the Kurds that Kissinger was referring to when he said to be America's enemy is dangerous.
I was just about
America's friend is fatal. And what he meant by that was not just, oh, we're backstabbers and we'll attack our friends, but it meant we'll support you in war. We'll support your insurgency, right? And then we'll leave you high and dry and you'll get killed anyway, you know?
Right.
And so that was what he was getting at. I'm the type to recommend, let's just not support these insurgencies in the first place, and then we're not betraying anyone.
Oh, 100%.
But of course, it was America that foisted the Islamic State on the Kurds, and then was in its own way obligated then to help the Kurds defend themselves from the Islamic State. But then how is that supposed to last for the long term when our allies, the Turks, are more important than the Syrian Kurds to Washington, D.C., and the bin Ladenites in Damascus? Washington prefers them. At least they're not the Alawites, friends with Hezbollah and friends with Iran. And so that's the priority, and the Kurds are screwed now. And that's the way they do business. I mean, they're just throat-slitting monsters, man. It's no different really than if you're talking about any like horrific totalitarian enemy regime in the world that we detest, you know, present or current.
Yep. You know, I know you have to leave here in a couple minutes. I do want to throw one more thing out to you. Sure. And I've really been kind of stuck on this, this thing of I really view the current state of the United States right now as, you know, it's like, okay, we're doing all these things, you know, man, think of like how much better we would be off if, you know, we took some of the money we put into war and we fixed our infrastructure, or we, you know, actually made medical or scientific advancements that don't require having to like obliterate somebody. And there, you know, the list is long for all the things that we could have potentially done far better. But I've kind of, it's probably not my term. I'm sure somebody well before me has come up with it, but I've kind of evaluated what the current situation is and how it's been for a long time is the sunk cost state. Like it just continues to do this, the same thing to where, I was like,
cost state. I should write that down.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I'm like, man, like this is like we really are living in a sunk cost state to where, you know, it's just like, oh no, like we've invested way too much into this, and even though it might be to our demise, like we're just going to keep doing it because we, you know, it's like we can't possibly backtrack now because we'll look at it's like, no, let's look bad and let's just have a moment of honesty so we can actually fix these things to help ourselves and potentially start the repair process. But none of these people seem interested in that. And, you know, I guess I'm kind of keying off on this point that, you know, it's like, where does it go from here, Scott? Do we get is there any hope at the end of the tunnel here? Or are we looking at like this situation to where, you know, we take the lessons of our forefathers, we take the lessons of everything past there, and we just start looking toward the future to where it's like, look, I don't know that this country is going to stay together. And so we need to be intelligent and open-minded to the idea that we may have to start something better. down the road, you know?
Yeah, look, the principles of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a good roadmap, man. There's a good handbook here about why this stuff works, right? And why what's wrong with our society is we keep abandoning freedom and trying to take these shortcuts and using government force to, you know, basically take a shortcut, have things our way now instead of later. And so we just have to stop doing that, right? Is stop doing unreasonable things and everything will be fine. So this is sort of like I'm sure you probably read this essay by Albert J. Nock, Isaiah's Job, about how, at least first and foremost, for people who understand liberty, that our task is to educate those who are reachable, and make sure that there is always a remnant that remains, so that no matter what happens, when things finally break down and people go, now what do we do? That you have somebody who has an answer better than embrace Marxism, right? That, you know, for like how to fix things, right? And so, so that's what it is. So that's first and foremost. But then secondly, you know, you gotta make sure to keep your eyes open for the positive developments here. As Ron Paul said in his speech a few years ago, that like, wow, the remnant is really growing a lot more. This is not just tending a garden. This is growing a forest. And, you know, again, or I'm sorry, I did an interview right before you, and I got what Biden's got so bad I can't remember. But forget the again part. Maybe I am repeating myself. Maybe I'm not. But we need hard money, and only libertarians understand why. Only libertarians understand why fractional banking and essentially the artificial expansion of the money supply constantly leads to price inflation, but then also even worse, the horrible boom and bust cycle that ruins the economy all of the time. We're the ones who understand how free markets work, why we need, you know, vastly decentralized power among the 50 states instead of consolidated in Washington, why we have to abolish the empire and balance the budget so that we can be free and have a prosperous society. I mean, you just can't be a world empire and a limited republic. And more and more people just get that. That's it. Of course you can't have it both ways. Ain't you never seen Star Wars? They had a republic and then it became the empire, and they weren't going to get it right until they got rid of the empire, and then they could get it right again. And then never mind the sequels, that never happened. You got to read the novels from the grocery store. But listen, the point is that America could be just fine if we just knock off all of the crap that we're not supposed to be doing. That, again, look, the libertarians, obviously we lead on this because we're good on everything. But again, anyone ought to be able to sign on to the, and I mean anyone but the extremely connected and in on it. But that means the 99.999% of us, including all the millionaires, virtually all of them, you know, maybe not defense contractors, whatever, a hell of a lot of maybe a million millionaires in this country who their interest is in having a free society and a free market, not being a rent-seeking crony, right? And you understand the truth of what ails us and what works well and what can't. And so then I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going with that. I was going to say something, but now I don't remember. But it was I'll say something else, which is that it is working, right? People are catching on to this. That like there are people like Dr. Paul, like, okay, people say, okay, Dr. Paul was right about everything all along. But what was it that he was saying actually? Well, you go back and you look, and he's saying we need peace, we need hard money. First and foremost, we need to protect liberty. That's how to protect prosperity for the people. And
that's right.
So, you know, end income taxation, and abolish the world empire. Roll back the welfare warfare state, the regulatory state, as much as we possibly can in all aspects. And so that is the hope. And look, like, if you want, you can look at it as just an irony or whatever, but no, man, I think it's actually really cool and important that, as Rothbard put it, that America was conceived in liberty. That this is our legacy. It's libertarianism is just the Declaration of Independence principles distilled and perpetuated forward, right? But the left and the right all find their same, the American left and right all find their same origins in original Americanism, from our revolution and from our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our, you know, protections of private property and free markets and stuff. This is what it's about. and religious freedom, of course, and all of it that comes with. So, if we got anything in common, it's that, and that's what works. So I think, if we emphasize the positive there, then even if, we can't turn the whole, ship around right now, at least when the crisis comes, people will really know that the answer is no, no, no. It's not to move further left or further right. It's to really protect property rights and free floating prices on the market, man, and kicking the cronies out and ending all the subsidies for everybody everywhere you possibly can, and make everybody sink or swim on the free market in real life. And that's what will lead to prosperity for everyone. Awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Scott Horton, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And I hope, down the road, we'll have you back on again. It's always a pleasure listening to everything that you have to say and all of the points that you make. So good. So thank you, sir. And we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Steel clad